It is 1:30 Universal Time. I'm Jim Tedder in Washington. Thousands of United States and Iraqi soldiers and police are searching for 2 American soldiers that a rebel group claims to have kidnapped. The United States military in Iraq says it is using air, naval, and ground forces to find the soldiers who have been missing since Friday. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice says their disappearance is of great concern to American officials. A rebel group linked to Al-Qaeda has claimed on the Internet that it seized the soldiers during an attack south of Baghdad. The group offered no proof, and American officials say they cannot confirm it. American Secretary of State Rice says the United States is working with its allies about how to answer if North Korea test fires a long-distance missile. Earlier, she said any such launch would be considered to be very serious and an aggressive act. She said such a test would show again that North Korea does not want to take a path of compromise and peace. The United States ambassador to the United Nations says he is meeting with members of the UN Security Council on a possible answer. A 2-day riot at a prison in southeastern Brazil has ended with the release of more than 250 hostages. Officials deny reaching agreements with the prisoners to end the revolt at the Viana high-security prison. 2 prisoners were killed in the riots that began Saturday. The officials say many of the hostages were women and children visiting family members. And they say the prisoners had criticized prison officials for moving some prisoners to other jails. 1 month ago, a powerful criminal group began a series of riots in São Paulo to answer the movement of several of its leaders to other prisons. At least 170 people were killed, including police officers, civilians, and prisoners. President Bush spoke to Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva by telephone about negotiations for a new world trade agreement. An administration spokesman said the Brazilian leader telephoned Mr. Bush to discuss the talks taking place at the World Trade Organization in Geneva. He said both leaders told their delegates at the talks to seek an agreement that will help all. The 2 presidents also discussed efforts to reduce dependence on oil and urge the use of other kinds of energy. A new opinion study shows that conservative Mexican presidential candidate Felipe Calderón has a small lead over his closest opponent ahead of the July 2nd election. The study shows that Mr. Calderón has more than 34% of voter support. Andrés Manuel López Obrador is second with more than 31% support. Roberto Madrazo has just over 27% of the vote. The study also shows that 13% of likely voters are still undecided. The company Zogby International and the University of Miami released the study. It included opinions of nearly 1,500 people. Almost half of them said they believed Mexico was moving in the right direction. You are listening to the news in VOA Special English. United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan is urging the new UN Human Rights Council not to waste its chance to become a strong voice for victims of human rights violations. Mr. Annan spoke to delegates at the group's first meeting in Geneva, Switzerland. The new agency replaces the former UN Human Rights Commission. International human rights groups had sharply criticized the Commission for permitting some of the world's worst human rights violators to sit in judgment of others. In recent years, its members included Sudan, Libya, Zimbabwe, and Chad. A new study says 75% of Palestinians support a document on Palestinian self-rule that generally recognizes Israel. The study also found that only 47% of Palestinians would go out and vote for the document. The study says 44% would vote against it. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has set July 26th as a date for the vote, unless the Hamas-led government agrees to accept his document calling for a Palestinian state. A study expert says the message to Mr. Abbas is to stop the vote, and the message to Hamas is to accept the document. Hamas opposes important parts of the document, but a government spokesman says Palestinian groups involved in talks are only a few days away from reaching agreement on the document. China and the Republic of Congo have signed a series of agreements during a visit to Brazzaville by Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao. Mr. Wen and Congolese President Denis Sassou Nguesso met before officials from their two governments signed the documents. The agreements include economic cooperation and health care. Mr. Wen is visiting 7 African countries to strengthen China's political ties and secure agreements to help his country's economy. He has already visited Egypt and Ghana. He will also visit Angola, South Africa, Uganda, and Tanzania. International organizations and governments have used the 61st birthday of Burmese democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi to call for her release. The United States, Canada, ASEAN, Amnesty International, and the United Nations Special Diplomat on Human Rights in Burma all released statements calling for her release. They also urged the Burmese military government to release all other political prisoners. The statements criticized the Burmese government for its lack of democratic reforms. In World Cup action, Spain has reached the second level by defeating Tunisia 3-1. Earlier, Ukraine defeated Saudi Arabia 4-0. Switzerland defeated Togo 2-0. Briefly, here again is the major news. Thousands of U.S. and Iraqi soldiers and police are searching for 2 American soldiers that a rebel group claims to have kidnapped. American Secretary of State Rice says the U.S. is working with its allies on how to answer if North Korea fires a long-distance missile. And a 2-day riot at a prison in southeastern Brazil has ended with the release of more than 250 hostages. And that's the news in VOA Special English. This is Jim Tedder reporting.